It's a very relevant issue about when are you supposed to censor people? Are you supposed to censor people at all? Does it make sense to censor some things and not other things? Is it too one-sided? Is it basically, if you look at the U.S. spectrum of political, is it basically right-wing conservatives that are getting censored? Is it also liberals, left-wing people? There's a lot of questions that I want to bring up with you, and also you guys in the live chat as well. You're free. Feel free to write anything that you want, and we'll bring it up as long as we can,
Yeah.
make it fit into the topic.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things there. I don't quite know where to start. I think
Yeah, that's a lot.
the I mean the issue, right? I think that you're bringing up is that social media provides your social connection to other people,
Yes.
and if you have censorship in social media, then the problem is that your ideas, your political ideas, could potentially mean that your social life suffers because in the pandemic, your social life is uniquely online.
Yeah.
Um, I think so that's your main concern as far as I understand, for at least in the case of the individual. We can look at it in the case of companies,
Yeah.
but uh, I mean the problem. I think that where I would begin is that as a private company, as far as I've read, these social media companies are well within their right to censor anyone they want.
Anyone
The
they
the
want.
first
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the First Amendment, which protects at least in the U.S., which protects freedom of speech, is um, only covers the government. It only protects you against the government quelling your freedom of speech, not so much private company. So they're well within their right to censor you. That is their legal right. But then the discussion is the problem is, on one hand, I think all of these companies, they understand that they can't survive if they censor too much. But at the same time, if
Yeah.
they don't censor at all, there's also going to be great backlash,
Yeah.
because you have a great deal of people who don't want to be associated with or on a platform that allows um, I think Facebook um, has been particularly egregious with Facebook. You know, people who are live streaming their suicides or
Oh
terrorist
yeah, for
attacks.
sure.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't. This sours my view of Facebook to think that's possible on that kind of a platform. So from a business model, they're stuck
Yeah.
in the middle because they have to censor or they lose customers potentially, or I don't know if you can call us customers, but they can't censor too much because then they also lose people. So even from the perspective of these social media giants, it's not an easy. It's a quite difficult task, and there seems to be no easy no. There's obviously no easy answer. That's why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
But there also seems to be, I don't know where you begin. Like, what do you use as your guiding principles? Even that seems to be quite difficult, or
Yeah.
maybe not.
The counter to the argument of these are just private companies that can do whatever they want. If you don't like their terms of service, you can find another place to express yourself. The problem with that is when companies begin to create a monopoly, when companies
Mm.
begin to have a monopoly essentially on online free speech, that then it becomes an issue. Then couple that with these huge companies are typically from the US, they're typically from America, and they have something called the Section 230 that protects them from anything that people post on their websites. So they say that we're not publishers. We let people publish what they want on the website, and we're not responsible for anything that's put on there, essentially. So they're covered by something that's even more reaching than the far reaching than the First Amendment, the freedom of speech
Mm.
and expression and all of this. So legally they're covered, but obviously morally they have a need to take off anything that would be both illegal, but I would say anything that's egregious, like something like committing suicide and all of this. They have a moral obligation to get rid of as much of that as they can. But I think most people will agree on that. But where it becomes a problem is when these companies have an ideology. I don't think most people have an issue with them taking down posts and stuff that's got to do with like suicide and crimes. I think people have an issue when it comes to ideology. So it's no secret that these companies are from Silicon Valley. It's a very left leaning in terms of the political camps, right? But I think most people would like to see a place where if you have a monopoly, I think that's the whole issue, that since they have a monopoly and they're obviously, to some obviously, at the very least a little biased, then it becomes an issue because then you have to operate within two or three specific companies if you want to talk online and communicate with people. And for you to do that, you have to either get in line or suppress your opinion if it doesn't align with what they consider the right viewpoints.
Well, I think the concern of a monopoly we can set aside if just for a moment, and I think on that there's not much disagreement. I think most people would agree that a monopoly in general is problematic.
Yeah.
Then the discussion is how you deal with it, right? Do you deal with it in a market? Does government take over, or do you allow government market principles to take over? But I'm just not so certain that it's when it comes to the question of what should be removed from these online platforms. I think it's simplistic. I fear that it might be simplistic to simply say, well, we just need to remove illegal things, and then that's end of story. Because how do you? Well, because again, I think, how do I express myself best? The question of what is legal or what should be legal also varies. I mean, there is definitely, from the right and the left, there is a perspective. The difference between the right and the left, one of the great differences is how you see government, how
Yeah.
broad-reaching it should be, right?
Yeah.
So the left has a perspective of, hey, more things should be illegal. Let's
Yeah.
take the issue of hate speech. The government should be actively doing more to make hate speech illegal,
Yeah.
right? So so in that sense, even saying that if it's illegal, it should be removed from these online platforms, I think that still makes the question a bit difficult, because what should be then illegal, and how do you legislate what hate speech is?
Yeah, since it's not a legal category, right?
Yeah, and I think also you're saying that there are a lot of people, you were suggesting that most people don't have an issue with some form of, let's call it social media oversight. Like there are
Yeah.
some things that shouldn't be on there.
Yeah.
But a large group of those people would also argue that hate speech should be taken down, despite the fact that that isn't necessarily illegal. So it's not enough to simply say we just need to remove things that are illegal.
No.
The category is much broader of what should not be on these sites, and then how do you define these categories? On top of that, there was an interview with NPR. It was then mid last year, and the interviewer was speaking with a woman named Daphne Keller, and she works at Stanford University with the Cyber Policy Center. And she was asked, give me 1 second, let me find it. She was asked that one argument that she was asked about this issue of bias against conservatives on these websites. And her answer was, all we have is anecdotal evidence. In the US, we hear most conservatives complaining that they think they're the victims of bias takedowns. But there are people all across the political spectrum. There are Black Lives Matter activists, there are Muslim rights activists who think that they're being unfairly silenced. So this is a concern that's shared by conservatives and liberals, and is not legitimately a subject of public conversation. So I'm not entirely convinced that it's uniquely a conservative issue. And you would say then that doesn't matter. being censored or just one side being censored is equally bad. I might think you might say.
Yeah, because I don't. I would if let's say if people thought something different than me and they were being censored, I would still defend their right to say what I find offensive, and I think that's very important to remember in this age. I don't agree that. I think NPR is also very left leaning, and
Yeah.
I don't agree that it's mostly like a neutral issue. It's mostly like people on one side and the other side being banned, and so we shouldn't worry too much about it. To me, it doesn't seem to just be anecdotal. It doesn't seem to just be like individual stories. The most the most known example that I think most people of you guys will know is Jordan Peterson, who was nearly fired from his job as a professor in Toronto, I think,
Yeah, he was
for
Toronto.
on the issue of transgenders, right? Of not using the right pronouns, and that's using the right pronouns. Now, whether you're for or against it, that doesn't to me that doesn't really matter. But using the right pronouns is much more of a left wing issue than it is a right wing issue. But it's much more enforced than almost any other policies that are not breaking the law. If you go outside of breaking the law, misgendering someone is much more enforced on social media. But that's a very left wing issue. So right wing people will generally think that there are only two sexes. You can be either a man or a woman. So if you perceive someone to be a man, you're gonna call them a man. Left wing people will say that that's very offensive, and so it shouldn't be allowed. Now those are two sides of the same issue, but social media has mostly taken one side on that issue and said that side is right, the other side is wrong. If you belong to the other side and you express that opinion, we're gonna throw you off. I don't think that's an anecdotal. I think that's a systemic decision that a lot of these companies are making. Um, I think it's a pretty good example of it being more general. And I just want to make this point that I think since a lot of these companies are more left leaning, I think it's bound that their policies, that their opinions would soak into their policies. It kind of makes sense, but at the same time, I think that as you just mentioned before, that left leaning people in general will have a tendency to want the government to take over more, while right wing people will have a tendency to have less government. So that implies that you're fine with having more restrictions and more rules as long as you think they're reasonable if you're on the left. But if you're on the right, you want less of all of that. So I think just by being kind of who they are, and I don't blame them for being on one side or the other, but I think the reason that we're seeing more and more conservatives, at least the conservative side, feeling like they're being punished more online than the left side is, I think it's because we all have bias and we all have a political side that we affiliate with the most. And I just think that comes into expression when these people make up the rules and policies for the social media companies, and they follow each other a lot of the times. So if one company makes a rule, other companies might be a little slow to getting there, but they kind of agree on the same rules.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would agree with you that with the perception that these Silicon Valley companies are generally left leaning, right? And the
Yeah.
definition of bias is that you don't see it. So I don't think it's an unreasonable argument to suggest that some of these left leaning tendencies, like you said, leak into the algorithms. I don't think that's an impossible thought.
Thanks a lot for checking out this clip from the weekly live stream that we do every single Friday on the channel. If you want to join us live talking about different issues where you can chat with us at the same time, you can do so at 3 p.m. London time in Europe, or at 10 a.m. New York time in the States, or at midnight in Tokyo. See you in the next live stream every single Friday at those times.